Chapter 2. The Real Estate Services Act. Alan recently assisted Peter in the sale of Peter's house. What are the legal consequences of his doing so? If Alan is unlicensed, but performed the service without receiving or expecting any money or reward, he has done nothing wrong. Celeste's brokerage facilitates the sale of Selen's home. How long must the brokerage retain records of this transaction? 7 years. Which of the following statements about trust accounts under the Real Estate Services Act is false? A brokerage must have a trust account for each client. Which of the following is not a power or duty of the British Columbia Financial Services Authority? Undertaking and carrying out real estate law reform. A person appointed by a brokerage to represent it for all purposes under the Real Estate Services Act is referred to as a managing broker. In addition to carrying out the functions of a trading services representative, a validly licensed representative is not entitled to 1. Carry out trading services for an unlicensed real estate brokerage. 2. Be the managing broker of their own proprietorship. 3. Carry out trading services for close personal friends and business associates although not employed by a brokerage. Chadwick is the listing licensee for a house. According to the Real Estate Services rules, Chadwick does not need to provide his client, the seller, with a disclosure of interest in trade form if the party making the offer to purchase the house is Chadwick's friend and tennis partner. Kenneth, a licensed managing broker, has been sued by a buyer who relied on the advice of a representative employed by Kenneth. Evidence in the case indicated that Kenneth's representative was grossly incompetent and that Kenneth had failed to carry out his supervisory responsibilities as the managing broker. The British Columbia Financial Services Authority, BCFSA, is instituting a formal disciplinary hearing to investigate the situation, and both Kenneth and the representative have received the notice of hearing. Kenneth does not think that BCFSA can discipline him and is angry that he is being held responsible for his representative's conduct. Which of the following statements is false? The representative cannot be disciplined jointly with Kenneth. Only Kenneth will bear responsibility for a breach of the Real Estate Services Act by his representative. The relationship between a brokerage and its related licensees is recognized and reinforced by certain provisions of the Real Estate Services Act, RESA. According to RESA, when a licensee advertises real estate on behalf of a client, the brokerage's name must be displayed in a prominent way. A real estate broker has listed a property for sale at a listing price of $100,000. The commission is agreed to be based on the difference between the listed price and the actual sale price. The agreement is contrary to the Real Estate Services rules. A developer is selling a development unit of subdivided land situated in British Columbia, and the developer has obtained a written statement from the purchaser acknowledging that the buyer has read the appropriate disclosure statement. If the purchase agreement is then entered into, the buyer may serve notice to rescind the contract no later than 7 days from the date of the contract. A developer of land not located in a municipality filed the necessary disclosure statement with the British Columbia Financial Services Authority with respect to his 20-lot subdivision. After foreclosure proceedings, the developer's bank became the owner of the subdivision. The bank wishes to sell the lots on an individual basis. Which one of the following statements is true? Because the bank is selling more than 5 lots, it should file a disclosure statement with the British Columbia Financial Services Authority. Which statute requires that a brokerage keep at least one trust account in a savings institution in British Columbia? The Real Estate Services Act. Under the Real Estate Services Act, where a licensee desires to buy real property or an interest in it for themselves, or for a company of which the licensee is a shareholder, director, or officer, or for a partnership of which the licensee is a partner. Which of the following must the licensee disclose in writing to the seller prior to the agreement? 1. That they are a licensee acquiring the real estate for themselves, or for the corporation or partnership. 2. The amount of remuneration the licensee expects to receive based on the transaction. 3. The name of the person to whom the disclosure is made. According to the Real Estate Services Act and Real Estate Services Regulation, which of the following statements is true? A real estate representative is employed by their brokerage to trade in real estate in the brokerage's name on behalf of the brokerage's clients. Which of the following is not one of the powers and duties of the British Columbia Financial Services Authority, BCFSA? To enforce the Code of Ethics and Standards of Business Practice. A real estate service under the Real Estate Services Act includes 1. Finding a party to acquire real estate. 2. Collecting rents or security deposits for the use of real estate. 3. Advising on the appropriate price for real estate. Where a seller sells a unit of subdivided land in British Columbia and the subdivision is a development property, the buyer has the right to rescind the purchase agreement at any time by providing appropriate notice, if the seller has not provided a disclosure statement to the buyer. Which of the following is required in order for a trading services representative to maintain their license? The representative must be employed by an active brokerage at all times. To qualify for a managing broker's license in British Columbia, a person must meet which of the following requirements? Have provided real estate services within British Columbia or an equivalent jurisdiction for 2 out of the 5 years preceding the application. The Realtor Registered Code of Ethics is enforced by the local real estate boards. Which of the following is not a power or duty of the BCFSA? Lobbying the provincial government to protect the interests of real estate professionals. Which one of the following is not a qualification for a trading services representative's license in British Columbia? Must have a minimum of 3 references from currently licensed managing or associate brokers. The Superintendent of Real Estate is appointed by the BC Financial Services Authority Board of Directors. A brokerage must maintain at least one account in a bank, trust company, or credit union designated as a trust account into which the brokerage must put, upon receipt, all monies received for or on behalf of a client. The Real Estate Services Act only permits the brokerage to withdraw money from such an account under certain circumstances. Which one of the following is not one of them? Money required for payment of a brokerage's business expenses. Which one of the following is not a course of action that the British Columbia Financial Services Authority can take following a disciplinary hearing? Suspend the licensee from participation in the multiple listing service registered. Which of the following is the British Columbia Financial Services Authority not explicitly empowered to investigate under the Real Estate Services Act, RESA? Breaches of the Realtor Registered Code. Where a licensee intends to purchase property, which of the following details must they disclose to the seller? 1. The fact that they hold a real estate license. 2. Any details that have been arranged for the resale of the property. 3. The fact that they will be sharing in the commission on the sale. When a real estate licensee manages rental real estate owned by themselves, the licensee must disclose to potential tenants that although they are licensed under RESA, they are not acting as a licensee in this case and are not regulated under RESA in relation to the rental real estate. To qualify for a managing broker's license, a person must meet which of the following requirements? Be at least 19 years of age. Which of the following is not a requirement of the Real Estate Development Marketing Act to protect the public? Developers must consult with members of the public over any proposed developments. To qualify for a managing broker's license in British Columbia, a person must meet which of the following requirements? Have provided real estate services within British Columbia or an equivalent jurisdiction for 2 out of the 5 years preceding the application. Once a licensee has obtained a signed acceptance from Alan of an offer to sell real estate owned by Bob and Carol jointly, the Real Estate Services Act requires the delivery of a copy of the agreement to Alan, Bob, and Carol. A trading services licensee who is not licensed to provide property management services can negotiate a lease document. The British Columbia Financial Services Authority is not responsible for which one of the following? Enforcing the provisions of the applicable professional code of ethics. Under the Real Estate Services Regulation, certain categories of persons are exempted from the licensing requirements contained in the Real Estate Services Act. Which of the following is not covered by an exemption? A business executive selling a neighbor's house for a flat fee. Which of the following is not a real estate service under the Real Estate Services Act? Constructing a commercial office building in Prince George for an owner who lives in British Columbia. The Real Estate Services Act does not provide for subdivision regulation by requiring all developers to supply a disclosure statement. The British Columbia Financial Services Authority does not have the authority to use funds from administrative penalties for non-educational purposes.